I'm James Pope, founder of Heads Up, and this evening's session I'll talk about in a second in terms of the detail. But before we get into that, just let you know that we don't ordinarily record Heads Up sessions because they are safe spaces, spaces for head teachers to be their authentic selves. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But we do record these sessions every other Wednesday. We run a themed session looking at a big issue in education, and this is one of those. So we do record those, and the video will be available afterwards. If you want to watch it back or you want to share it with anybody, then please do. Very big welcome, warm welcome on this first Wednesday of January to everybody. Just a quick overview of Heads Up, a little bit of framing. So Heads Up is a network of head teachers, former head teachers, future head teachers, who come together, network together to support each other. It started about 18 months ago, has really accelerated during this period of time of COVID. We've got sort of huge network growth with sort of many hundreds of head teachers now in the network. And we run 2 support sessions a week, one on a Wednesday evening, one on a Saturday morning. They are very informal spaces. If you feel like joining those, if you haven't been to one, they're very informal, they're very relaxed. And they're places where we support head teachers, but we also celebrate head teachers. We celebrate the role that head teachers play in our communities with our young people and with the staff in schools, because we don't think that there is enough of that going on. And we're all very aware, those of us in the network, lots of us have been through the ring of the mill of being a head teacher and have come out the other end of it. And some of us, like myself, are now doing things very differently. But we're all still very passionate about education, and we're still very passionate about celebrating the role that head teachers have got. I'm really conscious that we should spend more time lifting up each other in the education system, celebrating the positive and brilliant things that happen right across our education system every single day, and celebrating the skills and experiences that school leaders have. So that's very much what Heads Up is all about. On these sessions, every other Wednesday, we open it up to everyone, and everybody is welcome if you've not been to a session before. And we are partnered with one of our very many partners is Big Change. And Big Change are very supportive of the work that we do with head teachers across the education system. And Big Change have a manifesto, which they published at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, for what they call their Hopes for Education. And Big Change's Hopes for Education really resonate with the head teachers in the Heads Up network. And so we've taken those on in the last 2-3 months, and we've started running these Wednesday sessions where we take one of their big hopes for education and we're working our way through them. And you can see behind me, whatever side that is. My screen's mirroring, so I'm very confused. You can see behind me that we're looking at number 3 tonight, and how timely, given this afternoon's announcements in Parliament, ham-fisted and clumsily delivered as they were by our wonderful leader of education, Gavin Williamson. You'll notice the giggle when I said wonderful, but actually, the right decision. It's taken a while to get there, and it's taken, as everything has during the pandemic with this government, it's taken too long to get there, some would argue. But a good decision has been made about assessment for next year. That means we're now in a scenario that if we do return to assessment as it was, we're now in a scenario whereby the next time we have SATs or GCSEs or A-levels, it'll have been 3 years since they happened properly. And that is quite a significant period of time. So it is really relevant that we're talking about this today, and Big Change's Hopes for Education, and something that really resonates with the head teachers and the people within the Heads Up network, is that actually, the exam results and the exams and SATs in Key Stage 2, Key Stage 1, all of the assessments that we have of our young people don't tell the true picture of what our young people are and what they're about and what they could become. And actually, they take a very narrow snapshot of education. And we like to view education as a much broader and richer experience for our young people to have. It is ultimately their lived day-to-day experience for a significant proportion at the beginning of their life. And our view is that education has been distilled down to, in its most reductive sense, you know, 9, 10, 11, 12 numbers on an A4 piece of paper at the age of 16, which is, when you think about it, the most ridiculous way to summarize the entirety of a young person's life. And so therefore, it's really relevant that we're talking about this tonight. We definitely want to hear from you. So I'm definitely going to stop talking in a minute once I've introduced our two wonderful guest speakers. This one is a broader view and a story of success for every child, and we'll definitely want to hear from you either in the chat, so please do get going in the chat. If anything that our guest speakers say resonates with you, you want to applaud it, you want to celebrate it, or you want to challenge it, that's also good, then please do. And we're really fortunate this evening that we've got two guest speakers who are going to provoke the arguments and the discussion. And maybe not, they might provoke the consensus of opinion, who knows. But really pleased that Alison Kriel's joining us to kick us off. If Alison could give everybody a wave for people who don't know Alison. And we've also got Colin Goffin is going to do an input a little bit later on, so thank you for joining us both. And Alison's going to get us going. She's going to talk about the approach to assessment that she took in the school that she led and was leading. So Alison, without any further ado, I am going to hand over to your wonderful self.
Okay, hello everybody, it's really nice to see you and Happy New Year. Lots of familiar faces, and thank you James and Kate for inviting me to share a bit about my assessment journey this evening. So I have to put my hands up and say that when I first went into headship, I did what I was told and followed the guidance on how assessment should be done. And then I became an executive head and was responsible for 2 schools, including a failing school. And the failing school was my really big learning.
Lisa, what's happened?
Ooh. So so when I first took the school on, I mean, the results were like really, really poor, some of the poorest in the country. And it was a school of children living in very, very challenging circumstances. And I had this tremendous responsibility to them. So in the first year or so, we did all of the usual sort of narrowing down of the curriculum and being year 6 focused and all of those sorts of things. And we got amazing results. But the problem was, it wasn't embedded and it wasn't a happy school. And I wasn't celebrating. I didn't feel like I was doing the job that I promised myself that I wanted to do when I went into teaching, which was about providing hope and aspiration and a love of learning and a love of teaching. All of that was missing. And so I didn't celebrate because I didn't feel like I was celebrating the teaching that I most wanted to be doing. And it needed a radical change. I was also very conscious of the fact that the children got the grades, and so we had extremely high results, but it wasn't embedded. It was just, you know, and I just knew that I was letting the children down because they were going into secondary school and people kind of thought this is where they were. And I knew damn well that it wasn't. And that's where you end up with all of these tensions going on between primary and secondary school. And so I just felt like the school was doing well, we'd had a great Ofsted and all of those sorts of things. So I felt like I could take the risk to start doing things my way. And that's exactly what I did. And I spent quite a lot of time talking to the staff about what it means to be a successful pupil, and what does it mean in terms of where we want our children to be and all of those sorts of things. And I knew that I wanted pupils who'd be well-rounded, confident, self-assured, who knew they were more than a score. So that meant that we had to look at the curriculum all over again, and we had to look at assessment all over again. And so what we did was that we started from the child. So I don't know about you, but I used to get really I was always really sad when the year 6s did their final show and you saw then what their true skills were. You saw who could be really funny. You could see who was a great musician. You knew who the great artists were. And I find it heartbreaking that we don't know that about children until they leave. And so I decided that that wasn't going to be how they were going to leave. That was going to be the starting point in our school. So we started to look at what was the goal for the children in the school. And I said that was a teacher responsibility and a parent responsibility. And I mean, we were already working in a culture where no one child was teacher's responsibility. We were all responsible for all of the children in the school. So we would look for where the children were most successful. And we stopped placing an emphasis on English, maths and science, because we tell children that if you're good at English, maths and science, you're clever. And if you're not good at those subjects, we let them leave school believing that they're not clever. And I think that's completely wrong. And I believe that every single child has the potential to reach greater depth in something. And it's our job to find out what they can reach greater depth in, and then give them every opportunity to go on succeeding in their area. So for us, it meant we started looking at the children in a different kind of way. It meant that every single child had the sort of EYFS style conferencing with their parents, so that we could jointly work out where the strengths were. And we spent an awful lot of time talking about gold. What is your gold? And so for children in early years, for example, if you had kids who were really great, you know the ones who don't want to stop playing with Lego, instead of telling them to stop playing with Lego, upskill it and give them opportunities to become better and better at Lego, and give them opportunities to work with older children, so that then the Lego project became a bigger project. So for example, with the kids who were really great at Lego, we celebrated it and everybody knew they were great at Lego. But then we would have other people coming into school to do particular projects with the children. So we used to have a really wonderful architecture practice made up just of women who used to come in once a year and do a huge architecture project with the children who showed that they had skills which might open the possibility of them becoming architects. But they did all sorts of things. They did town planning, they did lots of modeling, they did loads of really extravagant things with Lego. We ended up having a partnership with a school in Denmark who were part of the Lego Foundation, and so they used to bring amazing Lego with them, and they come over once a year. And if you've got 4-year-olds working with 11-year-olds who all have a passion for Lego, what they do is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. You look at their maths, you look at their skills, you look at their creativity and all of those sorts of things. So those children would come out of class to do projects like that. The kids were brilliant at music. Every single child in the school got to learn a musical instrument. The first the musical instrument was the one that we chose for them by year groups. And then if they showed an aptitude for music, then they got to choose their second instrument. And the deal was that if they didn't, the lessons were free, but if they didn't practice, their parents had to pay for the lessons. So the children practiced their music. And by then knowing who the best musicians were in the school, what we found was the less English, maths and science we taught, the higher our results, because that wasn't our emphasis. And we also had a deal with the children in years 5 and 6, where we sort of said, we want you to do forest school. We want you to do all of the art. We had a specialist art teacher. We want you to do all the music that's going on in the school. We want you to do all of these amazing projects. But the deal is that when we do English, maths and science, well, we only did English and maths 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week, so we could fit in the whole curriculum. And it did not affect our results. And we ended up with combined level, the sort of age expectation plus. It never fell below 97% based on obviously the cohort, because we were in inclusive schools. So sometimes if we didn't have any children with significant leads, then it would be 100%. And if there were children who had difficulties, you always knew that they were never going to get to age expectation. We just accepted that. So how we did assessment was I trusted my teachers to know what levels looked like. I asked them, we would do our pupil progress meetings in the same way that everybody else did. But instead of them coming along with a whole load of test results, I would say to them, tell me where the children are up to and show me what you mean. And I wasn't looking in maths and English books. I wanted all of the pupils' work to demonstrate how successful they were. And the children were incredibly proud of their books. The teachers were incredibly proud of their books. And we were over-scrutinized as a school because our results were high, and also just because of tensions between our school and the local authority. So that meant that people came in all the time to look at what we were doing. And the one thing that always stood out was the fact that the quality of work in the children's books was of an exceptional quality and of a high standard, and you could see where their attainment was based on what we could see in all of their books, in their artwork, in their music. It was just absolutely everywhere. It was also really good to get the children to understand where they were up to. So with the children in the beginning of the autumn term, from the age of 3, they would say what they wanted to be when they were older. And of course, the younger ones would want to be a tooth fairy and all of those sorts of things. And then by the time they were in Key Stage 1, they begin to have dreams about the kind of jobs they'd want to do. And that would become more cemented in years in Key Stage 2. And the reason why we did it every year was we wanted the children to know it was perfectly okay to change your mind. You do not have to be anything forever. But what they used to do was they'd have those just little postcards, blank postcards, and on one side they'd say what plan. Well, with the youngest children, they would just have plan A. This is what I want to be when I grow up, and this is why I want to do it. And then once they got into year 3, they needed to start understanding how to get there. And so we gave the children responsibility for understanding what they needed to do to become whatever they wanted to. So, for example, we were really close to Arsenal. And so a lot of the children would say they want to play for Arsenal, which was completely fine and valid as far as I was concerned. So then if you want to play for Arsenal, that's brilliant. Where do you need to be when you're 11, when you're 16, when you're 18? Well, your behavior needs to be exceptional. You need to be great at maths. You need to understand collaboration and teamwork. And we talk about all the skills that you would need to become a wonderful footballer. And the children would write down the skills that they needed. And so they were very focused on where they were going. And when you're talking to children, I came to this country sort of as a migrant, and I just understand the sacrifices that goes into being successful as a migrant. And I had a school full of those kids. So I wanted them to be successful, and I knew that they wouldn't have a second chance. So getting it right was really, really important. And I was ambitious for them, and they were ambitious for themselves. Then what I'd say to them is, for example, one conversation I can remember having was, okay, so let's imagine you've now been recruited and you're an apprentice footballer, and we do all of that kind of stuff. And you playing a friendly against Leyton Orient, and there's a terrible accident and you break your leg. Are you still going to be a footballer for Arsenal? And it's just like, no, that's the end of my career. Okay, so what's your plan B? And that's when they say, plan B, I want to be a doctor. Okay, if you want to be a doctor, what does your learning have to look like when you're 11? What does your learning have to look like when you're 16? What does your learning have to look like when you're 18? And by giving the children that responsibility to understand where they're going to be, plus taking them out and about so that they could meet different people and all of those sorts of things, it meant we then had parents, children and teachers who had equal responsibility for being ambitious for the children. And it meant that we didn't spend our time talking about assessment, because everybody was wanting the same kinds of outcomes for the children. The other thing that I've lost my train of thought. So basically, there was this huge emphasis on placing. I just know that if you feel good about yourself, you become successful. So the children knowing what their goal was meant that they took risks in their learning. So everybody would know so-and-so is really brilliant at music, and they'd be celebrated, and they'd be going off and doing stuff with the Alison, or they, you know, whenever there was a music opportunity, they would be there having every single opportunity that I could throw at them to enhance their skills as musicians. It then meant they took risks with their learning, because they knew that they weren't failures. They weren't afraid of failing. But they also understood the importance of, if they wanted to be successful, they needed to be successful at everything. And so that kind of empowered them to feel successful. And if you think you're successful, then you are successful. By doing that with my teachers as well, they knew what they were especially good at, and they knew that I trusted them completely. So that meant that I got good teaching. And when you've got good teaching and you've got ambitious children, then results take care of themselves. But the one thing that I never ever felt that I had to do was to spend an awful lot of time on interventions and things. I can remember throwing out reading recovery, and that being very controversial, and the local authority going, let's say, mildly ballistic about it. You know, it's just like, you need to do this. And it's just like, well, you know, reading recovery teacher costs 64,000. They work with 6 children, and then you need to intervene again in year 4. Why don't we think about a different way of approaching reading so that the children have a love of reading, and we can support reading in different kinds of ways? We've got really, really skillful TAs and all of those sorts of things in the school. And then if you've got the whole school who have an invested interest in every child becoming a reader, it's amazing what happens. It's absolutely amazing what happens. So for me, it felt like the more I trusted my staff, the more ambitious I was for the children, and showed them their way in the world, and opened their eyes to opportunities, and was painfully open and honest with children and with parents about what they should be doing and how they should be doing it and where they should be looking for information. It then meant that we had this united community investing in every single child in the school. But when I say to people that the less English, maths and science we taught, the higher our results, people look at me as if I was some kind of weird person. But it just came up time and time again. So having the right curriculum, trust and honesty, I think, is the best way that I can sell education, basically, because nobody goes to school to fail, and no teacher goes to school to fail as a teacher. So it's providing those opportunities so that everybody can rise. And the other thing I would say is I was painfully careful in making sure I had teachers who were values-led, who had a love of teaching, like proper teaching, and who really, really enjoyed the company of young children. So even if I had someone who was an exceptional teacher, but had a negative view of childhood, they didn't belong in the school. So it was making those kinds of shouts. I don't know how I've done for
Alison,
time, because it didn't.
Spot on, and I can sort of say the chat's been on fire with people commenting. Let's give a big sort of heads up round of applause for Alison. I can see lots of nods in the room, and as ever, Alison, your wisdom, such an undervalued skill in our education system. Wisdom comes singing across, really, and all I'm saying, thinking, God, I'd love to have been at that school as a young person. B, I'd have really loved to have taught in that school as well under your leadership. So thank you for that description. I'm sort of looking over my shoulder and thinking, I can't think of a better exemplification, to get this going, and on just a broader view and story of success for every child. We talk a lot at Heads Up about this notion of the real purpose of education, and what education actually is versus what we're told to do. And that's come across. I've got all sorts of thoughts and reflections and questions, but I'm not going to dominate it. So this is the opportunity now. If you'd like to unmute yourself, if you'd like to wave frantically at me, if you've got a question for Alison, or you've got a reflection, or you've got just a thought, or you just want to say well done, that sounds brilliant. Whatever it is, unmute yourself, wave at me, use the digital hands. Entirely up to you, but let me know that you want to say something. Kulvinder, thank you. Getting us going, brilliant.
Hi, my question to Alison was, I mean, trust. You talked about, trusting the teachers, being a new, taking over a school as you did. How long does it take for you to trust your staff? Once you get, is that something that you built up over a year, over a term? Is it, can you talk a bit about, how long that sort of trust takes?
I'm just going to change this so I can see you. Let me change the view. There we go. There you go. Hello. What I did, I start with trust. And then I think if you don't start with trust, then it's harder. But I always believe that teachers went into teaching for a reason. And I always believe that nobody goes to school to fail. So if there are mistakes to be made, then it was my job as a school leader to enable those people to overcome their barriers, just in the same way that you want children to overcome their barriers, you also want your teachers to overcome your barriers. And yes, sometimes trust gets broken, but you can work from that.
That reminds me, Alison, of when I got my first headship, and like you, I tend to trust first, and there's a risk with that, because you can get disappointed and people can let you down. But 9 times out of 10, 95% of the time, it's the other way around. But I remember introducing something in the first year, and one of the union rep came to see me and said, "The thing is, James, we all really like it. We think it's a great idea, but nobody trusts you yet." I remember thinking, God, that's a really weird thing to say. But it is funny how that culture has been created because of the accountability system in our education system. That culture of trust has to be earned, does it? Are we not human? Do we not just generally trust in each other right from the off? And I'm sure we've all had experiences where we have been let down, but actually often we need to look at ourselves for that and think, oh, actually, where did I get that wrong? But really, really lovely. Great question, Kulvinder, to get us going. And I think I'm going to have to call you Jay Bell because that's the name on the screen. But perhaps you just want to let us know what your first name is and then make your comment or question.
Hello, thank you. Sorry, my name's Justine. Apologies.
That's okay.
It's sort of linked to this idea that you're talking about with trust and building trust and having trust go both ways, Alison. My question is, when you started, when you were like, okay, this is where we are and this is where I want to be, how do you, that starting process, there's a lot of staff in your schools who, this is how we've always done it, this is how we're expected to do it by the powers that be. You've come in with this new idea. How did you kind of manage that change, I guess?
So when I first went to the school, I was very honest with them and said, I've been asked to come because the school's in trouble, and we don't want the school to be in trouble. So we have to work together to bring about change. And I talked to them about the fact that I trusted them to be the best teachers that they wanted to be, that I knew that they were there because it was a difficult school. It was in an area that's sort of known as Murder Mile and all of those sorts of things. It was a difficult school. So nobody chooses to go and work in a school like that if they want an easy life. So I talked about that, and I talked to them about my vision. And I talked about the fact that this is something that we were going to do. It was never going to be my job to turn the school around. We were together going to turn the school around. There were some people who didn't, they wanted things to be, you teach something for 4 weeks, you assess, and then you move on. And they didn't stay, they chose. They thought that what I was asking was hard teaching. and so not everybody chose to stay. But I actually put a huge amount of effort into finding the right teacher. So someone left because they'd done something really, really awful to a child. And she was from a supply agency, left the same morning. And instead of just taking the first teacher that came along, I went through 8 very uncomfortable weeks finding the right teacher so that we could then set a standard in terms of how I wanted people to talk to children, to teach children, to be ambitious for the children in the school. And then when you set that benchmark, then it kind of helped everybody to understand where it was I was going. And I have to say, it was someone who had been dismissed from one of the mats. So she didn't come with this clean, sort of high flyer reputation. She'd gone through a really horrible journey, but the way in which she engaged with the children was absolutely fabulous. And so everyone could then see that I wasn't looking for, I wasn't someone who was from the DFE in a suit. I was looking for real teachers who taught with compassion, who respected the children, who wanted the children to see themselves in the school, in the curriculum, where the children knew that they belonged, and I wanted the teachers to feel that they could belong as well. So the whole curriculum was wrapped around the culture of belonging.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for that question and the response, Alison. And it sort of struck me as you were talking, you know, this, again, we talk about this a lot at Heads Up, this notion of, you know, what is the true purpose of education, and what, you know, why do people come into it? And I think Colin's just put in the chat about asking stuff, you know, why are we here? And I think, you know, we talk about that, you know, getting back to that, you know, that fire in your belly, the reason why you became a teacher and you became a leader in education. And we talk about this a lot, you know, it's not about Key Stage 2 SATs results, and it's not about Key Stage 1 SATs results or GCSE results, or those things are important as a sort of output. I said there aren't the reasons why we become teachers or we become leaders. We become teachers, and I think part of the issue with the lack of trust in the system is that a large proportion of it is actually operating to fulfill what they think the system wants, which isn't aligned with this fire in the belly and these values here. So we're all pretending to be something that we're not. And I think, you know, the role we talk, you know, for leaders and head teachers, it's then about, as you've described, it's about lifting the lid on that and, you know, being really clear about vision and what you want, and then getting the right people around you to do it. And that just sounds really great.
There was one other thing that you just made me remember there, James. So the other thing that I tried to do was to not make 1 or 2 people experts, but for us to just come along together. So, for example, the first thing that I had to work on was reading, because reading just wasn't okay. And I just think it's the best gift to give a child, right, is to have a love of reading. And I'm a big fan of the CLPE, and they did a program called The Power of Reading. So rather than sending one teacher to go and do the course and then come back and be the expert teacher of reading, I contacted CLPE to see whether they would come and do the 5-day program for every single member of staff, including schoolkeeper, so that we all understood what the power of reading meant. And everybody then became an enabler to ensure that every child became a reader. And when you trust, I mean, the support staff then felt like they felt completely valued, and they could see their role in helping every child become a reader as well. So then our reading became exceptional because everybody had an investment in it, because they understood it. So yeah, it's about valuing every single member of staff and seeing their potential, and not making the pupil's success the success of one person, but collectively we became responsible for the success of every child.
Yeah, and my quick reflection on that is, you know, I think when we think about accountability, which we'll look at in a later Heads Up session, that's how we do that. actually that notion of, you know, in a region, to stop schools competing with each other, we're all collectively responsible for every child's results, all of us. And I think if we can generate that, because actually at heart we are, it's only the things that are overlaid across the system that stop us from it. We start competing with each other about, you know, staff, or whether we're doing things better than the school down the road. It's kind of like, just don't get it. So that notion of collective responsibility, I think, is so important. I'm going to come to, there were a couple of people who were waving at me frantically earlier. Their question may have passed. Kelly, I think you did have your hand up, I think.
Yeah, and it was connected to accountability, please, James, it was. And can I just say, Alison, thank you so much for sharing. I know that you're no longer in headship, but I just wish I had the opportunity to work with you, because what a lovely, what a lovely vision for curriculum that you've encapsulated for us all today. But back to, the question is about, how do you be brave, okay? Because we know that curriculum is, the crux. That's what we're looking to offer our learners. But there are hurdles that come into that. High stakes accountability doesn't sit with the vision that obviously that you're trying to shape. So how do you be brave, knowing that you're in like a mismatch with that, really? So I suppose it will be covered in the future as well. But it is a very brave and risky thing that you've done, and you should be nothing but congratulated for that, because it's what's right and what's centred on the learners that you're teaching, isn't it? And I would have loved to have been, a member of your school, because, what a lovely, that's what we're looking for, isn't it? That's what we want for our children, to inspire them to be the best they can possibly be. So thank you.
Yeah, but what I'd say to you, Kelly, is that if you are a fearful leader, what you do is you develop a culture of fear. And when you've got a culture of fear, it means that people play safe. And that's where you end up with those cruising, those sort of, the results are a bit damp. They're not great. You don't end up with a vibrant school. Whereas if you can absolutely trust your teachers, and you know that you've got parents and you've got pupils who are ambitious and want to be successful, and they can see you being courageous because you're trusting them. Because I think it's that whole, it's about contracting and trusting and being honest with everybody, saying, look, I know we're doing things differently. And actually saying to children, Year 6, I want you to do forest school. I want you to do music. I want you to do art. Look at all these children who are great at these subjects. In return, we're going to do less English, maths and science with you. But when we do it, you have to absolutely nail it. You need to take it seriously. In the same way that we're giving everyone an opportunity to be successful in music, we need to make sure that the children who are really brilliant in English, maths and science have their opportunity to be incredibly successful as well. So we then have joint responsibility and accountability to each other. I have to say, behaviour was exceptional, because the children and people used to come and sort of say, how are you doing this? Because the kids were just amazing. And I just think that because the children had hope and ambition and they came to school, I always used to say that when kids run to school because they can't wait to find out about the day's learning, then you've cracked it. And that's what used to happen. The kids used to run like crazy to come to school because every day was an exciting day. And so it was easier to be brave. It doesn't mean that I didn't get worried about the results coming out and all of those sorts of things. But for whatever reason, the more it happened, the better our results.
I think we can pick that up, I think, Kelly and Alison, in the accountability, because I think one of the things that accountability, you look at regulatory systems, not just in education, but elsewhere, what they do is they hold things where they are. They're designed to basically preserve things in aspect. That's essentially what Ofsted is doing to the education system. And I suppose one of the risk, therefore, is in wanting to make a change. And I'm talking to somebody who definitely got their fingers burnt in this process. Change takes time. So the other toxic thing is actually changing things takes time. But we're not given time because the accountability system doesn't give us time to make change. And so I think all of that, that's quite complex to look at, but we'll definitely look at that in the accountability session. I'm going to take one more. I know some of you got others have got questions, but Zena, I think you had a question or a thought.
We go to Matt, because my question was very similar to Kelly's.
Great. So Matt, I'm going to come to you, and then we're going to go to Colin. Colin, I think you might have had a question, but you could perhaps pose your question as part of what you're going to say about assessment and the work that you're doing at Big Picture Doncaster. So Matt, I'm going to come to you first.
I was just responding to Kelly as well about the idea that in a heavily accountable system, concentrating on those those judgments isn't always the way to get better judgments. For me, it was sport. You know, when we were successful at sport and the kids walked 10 feet higher when we put the local cricket trophy on the table, attainment went up. We didn't do more of anything. But it was that thing for us. It was sport, and it was when we were successful at sport, which we were a lot. The kids were successful at everything. And when we came a journey, I explained that to an Ofsted inspector, and I said, "That's why results have gone up." And she looked at me as if I was weird, and I said, "No, that's our assessment is good because of sport," and she couldn't get her head around it. But I said, "That's what we've done. That's what we've driven." And I think there needs to be that understanding that, you know, kids don't walk out, "I'm really, really proud of what I've done in maths today." Not every day, but they do with certain things, whether it's sport or music or performance. That's when they walk out higher, and that's when they perform better and track.
I think that's, Matt, I think that's such a good point, and actually, it again really relevant to that. So actually, when we start to take this broader view of success, we can actually start to celebrate success in a complex series of different ways. So the school that I was at, you know, when I just started on my leadership journey, we had a PE teacher who was really into weightlifting, and he started a weightlifting club with some of our 16, 17 and 18-year-olds. Anyway, within 2 years, we ended up with 10 world champions in weightlifting. Now, if you'd said 3 years ago that was part of the strategic plan, everybody would have laughed you out of the building. But of course, what that did is it created, especially among our white working class boys, it created this uplift in, oh my God, we can beat, and they were celebrated, results went up. It's not a surprise. So Matt, I think really, really good point. Right, I'm going to hand over to Colin.
Can I just finish
Please,
what you're
Alison,
saying
yeah.
there? So I think it's just 100%. When self-esteem is high, you are successful. So when the children's self-esteem, they knew what they were good at, they knew what their goal was, so they became successful learners. And it was the same with teachers. So rather than me going in and grading teachers, what I used to say to teachers is, if you know you're going to be doing something exceptional, either film it or ask me to come and watch it. So I could then capture them when they were at their very best. It meant that teaching was exceptional because they set the benchmark for what exceptional teaching looked like. And the children set the benchmark for what exceptional learning looked like. And it all comes down to self-esteem. So yes, completely right. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alison. And again, a big round of applause for that input. Thank you ever so much. Inspired people in the room, I'm absolutely certain. Right, we're going to hand over to Colin now, who's going to give us another sort of short input and talk to us about assessment at Big Picture Doncaster and the work that he's been doing there. Colin, thank you ever so much for joining us, and really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, I was writing something down as we were talking, and then when the question came about bravery, I've sort of used the term a while ago. Leonard Cohen writes this song when he talks about they have the guns, but we have the numbers. And actually, when you hear the loudest voices in education currently, they are the loudest ones. It doesn't mean they're the best ones. It doesn't mean they're the ones that people agree with. We have a culture of anxiety, of a culture of fear, of a culture of worry and things like that. And actually, there are so many people. I mean, yeah, there's, what do we say? There's 40 people. So there's 30 people in this chat tonight who all think the same thing, where we should be going. You know, I'll talk to another group another time. We talk to another group another time. They're all there. And I just think, you know, we can draw the strength on each other. And the more we build what we're doing, it becomes undeniable that there is another way of doing something. And I think that's really important for us to sort of not cling to, but just be aware of, just, you know, to remind ourselves of. I did some work a little while ago for when Tim Coulson was Regional Schools Commissioner for London and the Eastern region. And I had to look at, we had to use Ofsted and exam results because that was the data they had. And what I did was went around and looked at schools that either had a really quick turnaround or a long period of what was deemed as success. And actually, the schools that were successful, I came back and I think it was Roy Blatcher who said, so what is it then? What's a successful school? And I said, well, I've written 20 case studies and there's 20 different successful schools. There isn't a way to say a successful school. In the same, there isn't a way to say a good lesson, a good teacher. It's who drives it. But what was common around them was they knew who they were. They had a sense of purpose, a sense of ethos. And it's interesting, Matt was saying about doing it through sport. There was one primary school entirely based around dance. Everything they did was based around dance. It was the beating heart of the school. But they were successful in everything else, but dance was where they went. There was another school in Essex, and they were brilliant. They referred, the senior leadership team referred to themselves as being the, you won't mind this language, it's 8 o'clock at night, as the shit umbrella. And they never discussed anything about accountability anywhere else apart from the senior team. Everyone else just talked about how to have happy children and having the best learning experiences they could. And I think that's something we can all do. And it's that, I think if you cling to that, all the rest will fall into place. There's a school in America called High Tech High in San Diego, and they get incredible exam results, but they never actually teach the kids exams. Because, and when they were challenged on it and asked, how do you do this? They said, well, everything we do in our lessons is harder than anything that will come up in the exam. So we know that the exams are going to be fine for them. We teach kids. Exams are something we have as a hurdle somewhere down the line. We teach kids, and I think it's really powerful. And it's kind of linking into where the big picture piece works, because that's what big picture is about. Big picture is really about one learner at a time is the key message through big picture, and identifying actually where that child needs to go. And it was interesting, Alison talking about the career steps and where they might want to go with that. That's a huge bit of how the curriculum is built around children in a big picture school. And in terms of some of the successes, we're very early in the UK, but some of the guys in the UK, I heard a presentation last year from a guy who does costume design for Lady Gaga. And he started off by making costumes for dolls because he was really interested in fashion, and they nurtured that, and that's where he got to. There was a guy, there's a band called Deer Tick, you might have, I hadn't heard of before they did it, but they're very nice if you're into your kind of alt folky stuff. And the guy there, his project was to build a guitar, and he built the guitar as his final project. He then used that to record his first album. That's what he does for a living. He's a musician. So there's those kind of pieces to work with it. So it really fits in terms of where Alison's talking about, real youngsters who want to be footballers. This gets traveled right the way through, because what you're doing is you're building a curriculum that's relevant to the learner. And if you're building something that's relevant to the learner and focused on self-determination, then you actually do get the self-esteem that comes alongside it and the motivation that works with it. I wanted to, even though I've already started, I wanted to start by just thinking about the experience around COVID. I've been having all of these conversations lately and hearing all this stuff about how much learning has been lost and how many children have missed this and missed that. And there's a couple of things I would say in that is, first off, I don't recall a time I've ever assessed the child in terms of time span of learning. I don't know what a month's worth of learning is, or 2 weeks worth of learning is. I don't understand that as a concept. But equally, even the people that are putting this across have actually said, we didn't do a measure this time last year, so we can't even tell you what we're comparing it to. And that's the people leading the research. So this idea about lost learning is bizarre. The other thing I think that's missed is what actually are the children learning in place of the stuff that they've not learned, which we're defining as the curriculum. And there was an article, and I'll share you the full article in the chat in a sec. I won't tell you it's Tony Blair's foundation, because I can't look at his face after Chilcot, but it's Tony Blair's foundation who did a lot of research after they published this article in September last year. And just to give you a real excerpt from it, and I shared this with all the Big Picture family. It says, furthermore, when the initial shock of lockdown had eased, young people across different country contexts reported they were able to use newly freed up time to explore their own interests. Chiming in with reports across global media, lockdown and abandonment of usual schedules had in fact provided some relief. As one student from Jordan reported, I got more time at home, so I got closer to my family. I learned many things such as playing piano, Photoshop, improved my skills at making logos, improved my English. Now I'm ready to announce my own business that I was working on during the lockdown. One female student from Indonesia said, it made me more productive at home, made me discover new hobbies and ways of thinking. What was striking was that young people from all different contexts reported using their free time to pursue creative and innovative ideas, which ironically, they did not have time to do alongside their normal education in school. So when I hear sort of people talking about what's been lost in terms of the education that's been lost, what they're talking about is curriculum coverage that has been lost, not genuine learning. And if you've actually got a student who is able to develop creativity and innovation and independence to work in their own way and do their own thing during this learning time, you're going to get these guys that are going to hit A-level or degree or wherever they go and are not going to be lost in the same way as a lot of students find, you know. And I think one of the things that you know, everyone probably quite aware of, if you've done GCSE and then A-level classes, is the A-level guys can't cope with it because GCSE is so spoon-fed and so pigeonholed into them. They suddenly get 6 weeks later and they're supposed to be able to do this wonderful independent research and do these skills and do this thinking, this creative stuff, and they can't do it because they've never been asked to do it. And I think that's really, really key. And I think that's kind of where I've sort of come from. I'll give you a little bit about my journey to big picture, which was an interesting one. It won't surprise you, haven't heard me talk about it. I'm quite cocky with stuff anyway, and I don't kind of hold back with things. And I think I went into the classroom and I started off as an English teacher, and I was going to teach my children English. I wasn't going to teach them an exam. My godson would have done his GCSEs last summer. I don't know if it was good or bad they got scrapped. I don't know if he did better or worse out of teacher assessment, but he was asking me to help him with his English GCSE, and he could tell me the assessment objectives and the criteria for the exam board, but he couldn't tell me the name of the poems he was studying, because that's what they'd spent their time learning, the criteria, not the poetry. And I've always hated that. And a long time ago, before I was doing this, I used to work for SSAT doing TEEP training. And I had an English teacher say to me once, you know, why don't children enjoy literature and enjoy history in the way that I did when I was at school? And I said, when's the last time you taught something that wasn't for examination? And she said, I haven't done. I go, well, there's your answer then. You know, and actually that doesn't mean that, and this is really important thing about it when we get into the big picture work, it doesn't mean that you're abandoning the importance of literacy, numeracy, literature, history, whatever it might be. What it means is you're actually focused on what is the important thing behind that, you know. And I, as an English teacher, my job, I thought, was to be involved in creativity and discovery and a sense of self and purpose and beauty. It wasn't, here is a anthology, this is the sum total of poetry, can you please go through and spot some metaphors? You know, because that's actually not what it's about. But if you actually teach poetry, the kids will walk into the exam and they'll blast it. You know, if you teach them what they need to be historians or mathematicians or scientists, however you want to put it, you know, then they will ace exams, because exams actually are such a tiny bit of what it means to do those things. And as leaders, I think what we've got to be able to do is we've got to give that confidence to our teachers and to our departments, and that to be able to do that and actually say it is okay, don't worry about the exam, teach the subject, teach your subject, and the rest will fall into place. You know, this is education, this is exam, and at some point we switch the points and flick to that track for a bit, then we get back on what's important and we go and study the subjects again. So I kind of went through this period of doing that, and just to do you in terms of how sort of cocky I was, we had a rather large multi-academy trust, rather influential multi-academy trust, come into the area I was working, and I got into a bit of a spat, shall I say, with the CEO of the Academy Trust. They said, you know, who do you think you are coming to my county and telling us what we should be doing? And I was offered a chance to put my money where my mouth is, so I did. And I was asked then to get involved in setting up a school, which I did, and you know, and it was fine. I was quite happy doing that. I did that for a while, and then there was a certain individual came to work in my town, and my school was being merged with theirs, and it wasn't an individual I saw eye to eye with. So I found a different route within the same trust doing some work. And what I was asked to do was to look at setting up alternative provision, because I'd always kind of been someone that really sort of put the child, which sounds ridiculous to be singled out as someone that puts the child at the heart of what you do and puts the child first, but in some large trusts, people have talked about capabilities and Ofsted and that kind of thing, you know, and the successful trusts and the leaders of successful trust are just as scared of Ofsted as you are. That's why they're doing what they're doing. That's why their schools work in the way they do. You know, it's not because they're clever and they're above it all. They're just as terrified, and they're just as hedging their bets on, am I going to get found out at some point? Because their credibility and their kudos comes from what they've got in terms of, you know, how they can actually make sure the system is worked and being supported. Like James said, they keep the system in status, and actually they're rewarded for doing that. But yeah, so I was asked to put this together with AP, and I started looking around, and I already knew Gwyn ap Harry, who set the XP schools up in Doncaster, and I'd known Gwyn for a long time through Cramlington. And I don't know, many people are sort of aware of Cramlington as was. Cramlington was 4 times outstanding in a row in the sort of 90s, early 2000s. And the head teacher there, Dennis Wise, and this is why it's always lovely to talk about children and the idea of primary. He wanted his secondary school, his very, very successful secondary school, to be the biggest primary school in the country, because his vision was that primary schools taught children, and as they got further into secondaries, the children became less important and the subjects took over. And what he wanted to do was prioritise the child, and the subject was a way to support the child, not a barrier to working with children. And you know, it was really fascinating. So anyway, I spoke to Gwyn. And I said, look, I'm doing this work around alternative provision. And I almost felt insulting to him, because XP is not an alternative provision school. XP is a regular mainstream school. They just do really interesting and creative ways with the way they put their curriculum together and share it. But I knew that in comparison to what I was doing at the time in my multi-academy trust, it was very alternative. So we had some time together, and he introduced me to this idea of big picture. So funnily, I was kind of introducing big picture principles in a very small way in a little AP sort of group cohort corridor in a school as part of a multi-academy trust. Then the funding ran out. I'd secured charitable funding for this, and it was quite evident, really, in terms of the way that the trust was going, that we were spending I think round about £250,000 to £750,000 on curriculum development. I was the only person employed by the trust outside of a school role that was doing pastoral work, and my role was funded by a charity. And when that charity money stopped, the role was going to stop. So I was then asked to go back and work with somebody that I wasn't going to be in the same room as, let alone be part of the leadership team, which sounds very unkind and very unsupportive. And I will be supportive as I can to some people, but some I can't invest in. And, they have their path and I have mine. We'll leave it at that. I think when you leave through a difference of integrity, you know where you are. But so anyway, so I kind of went with nothing at all. I thought, right, I've not got a job now. What am I going to do? And I had conversations with people like Alistair Smith and Mark Lovett, who I met through Cramlington again, and they said, you need to just be who you are, know who you want to be, know who you're going to be and what you're going to do. And so I just contacted a few people and what was out. And Gwyn actually got hold of me and he said, look, I've just taken on overseeing this big picture school in Doncaster. And he said, I know you're interested in it, because we had a conversation previously. He said, what I want to do is, as part of my team, I want to recruit somebody to be employed by XP, but offer leadership support to big picture, or to free capacity at XP to go and support big picture. So I went up for that and had a look at it, and there was 2 of us that were interested in it, and the other person that went there was actually part of the local authority at the time, so I had connections I'd have had to make, and for expediency said, we love what you had to say, but we're going to offer it to them. So I went, yeah, no problem. And a little while later he rang me and he said, are you still around? And I said, yeah. So we need a bit more support than I thought. So he asked me to do 2 days to go and support Big Picture School. At the end of the first day, when I'd been in, we had a meeting, and it wasn't, and there's a long story as to why it got to this point. It's nobody's fault for anybody involved. It was a absolute cock up by committee. Nobody really took ownership of it. Nobody really understood what big picture was supposed to be. The staff started the same day as the children, doing a brand new thing that had never been attempted in the country. The pre-opening Ofsted, was based on a lot of policies cobbled together from other places that didn't in any way reflect what a big picture school is. The curriculum policy said things like, if children are struggling in language, in English and maths, we'll take them out of the languages lessons. There are no lessons in big picture schools. It just didn't make any sense at all. So it was I got a friend in the army and they call it a cluster something, and I won't finish the end of that word, but that's what it was. So the end of the first day, we had a chat, and he said, okay, yeah, I agree with you. He said, I haven't coloured your opinion. I just want to hear from you. He said, can you do me 3 or 4 days a week instead of 2? And I said, yeah, okay. I'll do that. The end of the second day, we went to the local authority and they said, okay, instead of 3 or 4 days, can you come and run it? And I went, yeah, why not? You know, this looks like fun. What had happened was a student-led curriculum had gone from being the students determining their own learning to the student deciding what they wanted to do. And what they wanted to do was play football all day and tell the staff to off. And so that and I thought, yeah, I'd like to do that. That sounds fun. So we went in and the authority said, what do you need to make it work? And we said, well, to be honest, okay, what we need to find other provision for the current students you've got there who were dumped in because other stuff was closing, not because they'd chosen to be there, not because they were a match for the model of what Big Picture should offer. They had things called learning centres that were closing and they had nowhere else for these kids to go. Someone else turned up and said, yeah, we'll take them. And they chucked them in and it was a mess. I said, then what we need to do is we need to spend 6 months to a year properly building this school. And they said, right, well, we'll give the kids some tutoring elsewhere and you can have 6 weeks. So, okay, yeah, we'll have a go. So we took that on, and the actual cohort we started to recruit, we didn't actually get them or know them or meet them until the penultimate week of the summer term in 2000 and where we were there then, 19, yeah, but with summer term 2019. So we had about half an hour meeting with each child to get them on board to come into the school. The first time we really met was in September. So they came in September, we started to build things, recruited some new staff, tried to work with the existing staff, exactly what we were saying before, you trust in the people there. You know, my thought was these kids have actually, or the staff have gone through exactly what the kids have gone through. They've not been looked after. They've not been supported. They need to have a chance, and I wasn't going to write them off. To be fair, even the previous principal, we tried to keep him on board as a lead advisor. We have advisors rather than teachers. It sounds semantic, but it's quite key in terms of how the system works. So we tried to keep him on board, but the sad thing was, I think he'd just it all been too much for him. The poor guy, you know, he'd been burnt by it really. So we took it on and we started running it. And 3 months in, I was in Seattle because Big Picture is an American idea, and I came across to Seattle to develop really the ideas we were working on and get a sense of where we were. While I was there, Ofsted came and decided to inspect the school, and I said, "Don't let them in." And everyone was a bit fearful, as people are. So they said, "Oh, we have to let them in." I said, "No, don't let them in. I'm not there. Refuse entry to the building." But I wasn't there, so they were allowed entry to the building. And they came in and they said, "This is an absolute bloody shambles," you know. And it was, because it was 3 months old, you know. And what they came based on a pre-inspection subject of, you know, pre-opening inspection based on policies that were completely irrelevant to what we were doing. So, and we also had these older guys. We had 14 of the older ones, 12 of the younger ones. The older ones weren't on site with us. So basically they'd come in and go, "Well, how are you responsible for the curriculum education of kids that aren't with you?" Which is an absolutely fair question, you know. So we ended up, as you would expect, in that inspection. But what was good, if you can find good things in an inspection where you get an absolute kicking and you're not even there, what was good was actually they recognized what we were trying to do was something that was different and innovative in terms of our curriculum approach. What they also recognized was that the year 7s, the younger children we had, and they were the ones that we had started with, as opposed to the older ones, which were really it sounds horrible because they're kids, but were really a hangover from the previous setup. That actually they were responding to education in a way they never had done before. And these were kids that have been put out, you know, some of them were doing an hour a day for the past 2 years, and that was lunchtime in their primary schools. That was all they did. And they were coming to us and they were engaging with us 5 days a week and producing work and moving forward in project work and things like that. So there were real green shoots. Unfortunately, the overhang of the other stuff was too much for us to overturn. So we had to take a step back and repackage as an alternative provision. Otherwise, a follow-up inspection would have been in the same position, and it would have binned us completely. So it's a shame. Had we gone in at the start, you know, if you were going to go somewhere, don't start from here. They always say that in Norfolk, where I'm from. If we'd done that, we would have built the AP first before we even thought about registering as a school. We would have known exactly what we were about as an AP. Then we could have built the curriculum, done that. And what's been really positive actually is in the conversations I've had with people like Sean Harford from Ofsted afterwards, and Christine Council, who I used to work with, who wrote a lot of the curricular stuff that fed into Ofsted, wasn't dismissive about what we were doing. They were really interested in what we were doing. But what we needed to do was we needed to give what Gwyn and I call the beauty of and, because we could have either said, right, we're going to go with the inspection framework and big picture, which we were never going to do. Or we could have said, right, we're going to carry on. We're going to try and be this school. We're going to keep sticking with big picture and stick 2 fingers up to Ofsted, in which case we'd have been closed. So what we've had to do is find a different way of working to build that. So that's a bit about the journey. You want to know more about the curriculum model and the assessment, obviously, it's what we're here to talk about. The real key thing about it for us is this relational work and this one learner at a time. So in terms of big picture, put really simply, we have 3 key things that guide us at big picture. Okay, the first thing is we build a relationship with the learner. That's absolutely key to what we do. And that relationship is the learner and the family. The family are desperately important. During the last period of lockdown, we had probably higher engagement than most schools because of what we'd set up in terms of that relationship to start off with. And also our families sat in on our video check-ins we did every day. So they understood the learning. You know, we probably had our parents in, and we still do, even though we're now drawing from other schools. Interesting, working on elective home ed at the moment, getting them back into education. But we have the parents in probably as much as a primary school would do in terms of conversations. When we put the learning plans together, the learner, the parent, the school, we all write it. It's a really important join up to build that relationship, because we're all partners in the learning of this child. Because we get really good relationships going, it means the curriculum we build is relevant. So we will take the interest of the child, the issues around the child. We have children that come to us and they may have, we had one, lost his father to alcoholism. So actually he wanted to do a project around alcoholism and abuse and around debt, because the family got into debt because of it. And that was what he wanted to work on. You know, we look at issues. What's really interesting in the States, the school I visited there, they're on the sort of like the cross point of 4 LA street gangs. Yes, those kids have got issues they want to talk about and stuff they want to explore in their projects. You know, ours have got them too. At a really simple level, just saying to our kids, what pisses you off? You know, what winds you up about where you are and what's going on? Let's find something, let's get a passion going. Often employment and careers is the way to go. What you get then is you get a piece of work that is coming from them. So it's got self-determination around it. It's why we have advisors rather than teachers, because our advisors draw out the interest of the child. We use a lot of work from social pedagogy about the common third. So the piece of work that's produced is the third element. You've got the learner, the advisor, and the work is a third thing. It doesn't belong to the teacher. It's not me saying this is you. What you get with that though is a huge amount of rigor you can apply to it. That's the key bit. People think it's just kids doing nice stuff and playing around with things, you know, are they doing little projects, whatever. But actually, because it's relevant to them, because it means something, you can employ a huge amount of challenge and rigor to that work that they're doing, because they want to do well at it, because it's something they believe and they're interested in. Now, where you can go with that, and this is the bit we were building as Ofsted came, which is what Sean Harford saw and what Christine appreciated, was actually from that we can then branch out into a curriculum of breadth and depth. But it's a curriculum of breadth and depth that has its starting point at the learner, not the national curriculum. Although our assessment framework and our learning domains do hit all of the national curriculum at Key Stage 3. You know, they're not designed for that, but they do hit it, they do cross into it. So we had a child really interested in snakes. So from snakes, we can get into biblical stories with snakes. You know, we can obviously do biology around it. We can start to do poetry. We can build out from there. We've got a lad who's really interested in the RAF and wanted to join the RAF. I had a little boy in year 7 who never would have considered poetry. It's like we're now going to a poetry lesson, studying an Irish airman foresees his death, you know, in a Yeats poem, and I'm talking to him about it, and we're actually discussing my family and the history of Ireland and why Ireland and England work in that way, and I'm talking about the troubles in Northern Ireland, and I'm talking about imperialism, and we get a huge amount just because this guy said I want to go to RAF cadets, you know. So it's where you go with it, and that's why our advisors are what we call expert generalists. They're not teachers, they're expert generalists, because they can draw on all sorts of different things. Now, if you imagine where you are as an advisor, our term for it, your work in the evening then is going out and going, oh, this kid's an interest in film. I'm going to find the Mark Kermode Secrets of Cinema and drag that in. This one's dead interested in volcanoes. Do you know Scotland, Edinburgh is actually built on a volcano. Let's talk about what that means and how we go with that. And it's all that stuff you're doing rather than here's 15 essays based on the same thing. You know, now I know it's easy to do when you haven't got to do the 15 essays based on the same thing, but there are elements of it we can introduce. And I think that, you know, for me, what's really interesting is that the potential for, when I was having the conversation with, you know, senior people at the inspectorate, they were very interested in this as a way in terms of how we might do it and where we might go with it. So it's not something that is pie in the sky, you can get away with an alternative thing. It can be done in terms of, you know, kind of if you're creative, even if it's a section of the curriculum, even if it's part of the week, even if you just say, okay, let's use it for the humanities framework. So in terms of what we do, just to round up and get to the assessment, which is what it says behind hashtag number 3 on James's shoulder. In terms of assessment, then we've used the big picture domains previously. And the big picture domains go into things like personal qualitatives, quantitative reasoning, historical thinking, and things like that. And if you look into them, they're pretty tough. There's some high level stuff in those domains. You know, what we've now done, because we're working with younger children and those domains are for them to be assessed when they get to 16, we started off by breaking them down into smaller stages. We've now actually rewritten them almost totally, but they still link in. So we have 3 things we assess on, and we assess on attributes, skills, and knowledge. And actually what we do is we set a target based for the children around where we want them to progress around attribute, skills, and knowledge. And for some of them, it may be solely attribute, it may be solely skill. For others, it may be some knowledge, depending on where they are. Again, it's one learner at a time. So our assessment is as much based around the individual and our target setting around the individual as the curriculum is, because actually it should be, you know. And I can go on for hours and I'll rabbit on. So I'll just finish off with a line from Elliot. Elliot Washaw was one of the founders of Big Picture US. And this is what he says about assessment. And it's from one of his books. And it's kind of a starting point that we use when we were putting things together. So he says, what is progress, or what is success? Most would define it as good grades, great test scores, a high school diploma, and a pathway to post-secondary learning. While we don't argue with these indicators, our experience tells us they are inadequate. We prefer additional indicators from a wider perspective, obtaining enjoyable and productive work with good prospects for growth, raising a family, contributing to the community, and figuring out how to navigate life's ups and downs. So the measurement that's used for Big Picture is the quality of their work and how it changes them as people. And that's a really, really key thing in terms of how we drive stuff. And I'll be quiet, that's me. Thank you.
Colin, that was awesome. Big round of applause for Colin, please, everybody. And Colin, never apologise for providing narrative context. We love narrative, heads up. You know, the things that inform what we do and the places that we've been that take us to where we're going are really important to us. So the context was really useful and really interesting. And I'm sure that there'll be, again, lots of thoughts and reflections and questions. I mean, the one thing that struck me is the parallels between what you've said and what Alison was saying. And you know, I put that in the chat. You know, relationships, find the relevance with young people, and then build from there. And actually, the assessment will fall out of that. How you sort of make qualitative or quantitative judgments about how the learning that children have made will fall out of that really strong starting point. But open it up. We've got about what time is it? Oh, blimey. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes for questions, and then we will wrap it up. So has anybody got a question for Colin, or a reflection, or just a statement, or anything that people want to share from themselves in their own work? That would be brilliant. TJ, come to you.
Oh, guys, thanks. I mean, thank you, Colin and Alison. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you guys. And obviously, I've been on this journey, kind of where education is and why it needs to develop. overall, I was quite, like, I mean, I found it really interesting. I mean, obviously Zena and I kind of know each other, but we're on this journey in terms of, like, I kind of look at education and think, where are kids going? Like, what are they learning after school, and are they ready for life? And they're not. I mean, sitting in an exam at the end of every 2 years and memorizing information is not enough to prepare them for real life. And mental health is just going through the roof. So like, working on these core skills, these soft skills are so important in the 21st century. Like, when I'm looking to employ people, I'm not looking for kids with just A's. I'm looking for a diamond in the rough. I'm looking for someone that's going to come out of their shell and be confident and have some interpersonal skills. And I think as head teachers, we all need to collaborate and kind of push forward with that goal. And I genuinely believe that if we go back into, like, after COVID, into education, it's exactly the same way. We would have missed a massive, massive opportunity. So that's all I wanted to say.
Brilliant, TJ. And you'll get lots of people nodding around the room, because I think lots of people who will wholeheartedly agree with you. And thank you for that. Carrie, I'm going to come to you.
Yeah, I just want to say that I work in special, so I actually feel really privileged because we are not bound by the standardised assessments that everybody else is. So we can personalise our curriculum and personalise our assessments. So that whole holistic approach we can do. We do thorough preparation for adulthood. Admittedly, many of our young learners might end up down the social care route, or, you know, at best supported internship, maybe a job. But that is their future. That is preparing them for adulthood and their contribution to society. It's not very often that I stick up for the DFE at all, especially right now. But what we have got some members of staff doing and exploring is the character development and the virtues. And actually, as they've been doing that, they realise we do it anyway without formally, embedding it. But actually, if schools do adopt that, as opposed to just, teaching to the test and grades and exams and things, and do think about trying to incorporate the virtues within their curriculum, then I think it would be much better. But I just feel really privileged when I have to listen to all of you.
That's okay. But we don't mind the privileged position that you're in, Carrie, and it's great to hear that. That you are in that privileged position, but I think what Colin come in a second, but I think what's really interesting about it is these things can happen, and I know XP in Doncaster and the work that Gwyn and the team have done at XP quite well through the whole education work, and I think there's a view that some of this stuff is softer and somehow less easy, but actually when it's done well, this sort of student-led facilitated learning is actually way more challenging, and it takes children to a completely different place in terms of what they can demonstrate that they can do really well. And I think you see that, I think, in special education settings, because you do have that freedom, but I think it is possible for it to happen in other settings as well. Sorry, Colin, I cut across.
No, that's what I was going to say. I think, echoing what Carrie said about the privilege of, I can quite carry this and go, yeah, we did this, because I'm not in the end sitting in 3 exams. If I was putting in 3 exams, which was the intention, and it still will be, we're talking about where do we go in terms of building this into a school, a registered, normal school going forward. But I think also, I've always done it. I've done it as a head of arts faculty. I've done it as an English teacher. I've done it whatever, and I think one of the things we can do is we can, as leaders, we can embolden the people that are in our teams and around us to actually to find a way to do that in whatever your sphere of influence is, influence it, and I think we can really find that as a way to happen. It doesn't have to be, restricted because there's exams. You can still teach what you want to teach the way you want to teach it, and the exams will come good.
And actually, on that point, Zena, before you come in, just on that very point, remind me at the end, Kate, the way Kate's gone, my screen's moved around and everybody shifted. Kate's down there. So, because actually that point about sphere of influence is really important, and that's what we're really about here at Heads Up. So at the end of this session, we will ask you to make your pledge. So actually within your sphere of influence, whatever that may be, whatever your role is, what will you pledge to off the back of what we've talked about tonight to make a difference within your sphere of influence? So just be holding on to that thought whilst I go to Zena.
It's just a really quick point Colin mentioned at the start, the people with the loudest voices, although they get seen, doesn't mean that everyone is aligned to those people. I think essentially we need the government and the DfE to stop highlighting certain CEOs, certain trusts, and putting them on a pedestal and saying this is how we should do it, because like Colin's mentioned, there's not one way to be successful. There's not one way to be a good teacher, a good student, a good school. And I think that kind of links really well into our pledges. What are we going to do in our settings that's going to be making a change towards a brighter, better system for our children? And we've said it before, I don't want my daughter to get to year 11 in 10 years time and do the same stuff that I did when I was at school. You know, things really do have to change. But thank you, Alison and Colin. Tonight has been really, really good. You're both wonderful. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Zena, for that lovely reflection. Anybody else got a question or reflection or just something that they want to share? Anything at all? Chris.
Right. Colin and Alison, thank you for really refreshing descriptions of the work that you've done. I think a phrase came to mind, quality will out, in the sense that both of you, I think, have demonstrated that you can go down a less recommended path, should we say, and be successful with it, as long as the values and the intent behind it are strong. And I'm constantly, as a lot of you know, thinking about how we do try to translate this kind of great practice into the realities of the education system that we want to see. And I think that we have to make it attractive, you know, and stand out as possible and doable, because it is no more challenging, no more difficult, and no more valid than the way that things are done at the moment. It is just that we face the challenge of being the people who people listen to. And so I think that when you talk about pledging, James, to what will happen, I think that the direction that we should be looking at is that using all of our different routes to influence to try and put that that kind of approach into the mainstream. So thank you ever so much. It's really refreshing to hear what you have to say. And it just reminds me, I used to say that a lot of schools did well in Ofsted just because they were good, you know, and that they did good things and they'd got great values. It wasn't always the case. A lot of manufactured outstanding schools I've been in. But I'm really heartened by what I've heard, and it was really refreshing. So thank you for what's been a fabulous evening.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. And yeah, and actually, Colin, your quote at the beginning, and I'm a huge fan of Leonard Cohen and Leonard Cohen's music. So your quote at the beginning really resonated with me, because actually, essentially, what you've just described is what Heads Up is about. You know, so ultimately, our view is that actually there are hundreds, if not thousands, of values-led leaders, heart-led leaders in our system who are not able to be the leaders that they set out to be because the way the system demands. And you know, our view is very much actually there are more of us than there are those, and they may have the guns, but actually we have the numbers. Actually, is really resonates, and you know, that's what Heads Up is all about. If we can come together with the now hundreds of head teachers who are in the Heads Up community, and we can connect to other organisations, and we've got Oliver in the room this evening. You know, other organisations that are partner organisations that also have access to hundreds of head teachers. And actually, if we can collaborate and connect around our values as leaders, then actually that's something that we can really get behind. Actually, how we then decide to enact change in our schools is entirely up to us. But we won't end up with them in that scenario. We won't end up with a McDonald's education system, which is very much the drive that we've got at the moment, is that you can walk into any school in the country and you know you're going to get a Big Mac. And actually, you know, that's never going to work in a context-focused world, where context for our schools is really, really important. So, you know, I think if we can coalesce around our values, then people can be the individual leaders who want to lead in a spirited way that they set out to be. So that would be my summary of this evening. And Once again, huge thanks to Alison and Colin for their contributions on a late Wednesday evening at what feels like the deepest, darkest depths of January, but it's only day 3 at the beginning of the spring term. It doesn't feel like that at all. Thank you for all of you for making the time and the effort to participate. The chat's been on fire this evening, and there's loads of really fantastic stuff in there. Please do remember to share on Twitter that you joined Heads Up this evening. Ultimately, we offer support to head teachers. We offer one-to-one crisis coaching to head teachers who are really struggling, and then we offer our weekly support sessions to head teachers to come and join us. All of that's offered for free, and it's, you know, that work and that support is provided to head teachers by the people in the network. So the more heads who know about us, the better. So please do share Heads Up across your own networks. Please do encourage head teachers that you know to join the Heads Up. It's not just for people who are really struggling, it's for everybody. So please do encourage them to join. Please do make those pledges and make those pledges public, and put the hashtag Heads Up for Head Teachers into your pledge. There is going to be a prize for the best pledge this evening, and I'm going to hand over to Kate, who's going to tell you exactly what that prize will be.
Thanks, James. Mandy, who was offered the prize, has buggered off, which is really helpful, isn't it?
She was here. She's gone.
She was here. She's gone. You're right. So Mandy is one of the Resilient Leaders Element coaches, along with myself and Audrey, and she has offered a place on her 5-week coaching program entitled Finding Your Mojo, which is a pretty awesome coaching program. And she said she'd like to offer a space on it for free for one of our Heads Up community who pledges to make a difference in their community tonight. So if anybody wants to tweet out their pledge, and if you're not on Twitter, just pop it in the chat and I will retweet it for you. But I think that's a pretty awesome prize, actually.
That is a pretty awesome prize.
Facilitated by Hannah Wilson and Mandy. So it's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. So yeah, so that should encourage you to get yourselves onto Twitter or whatever social media platform you use, but obviously just tag us in and let us know. We're on LinkedIn as well. Off the back of what you've heard tonight, what's your pledge for taking a broader view and a story of success for every child through assessment? What do you pledge to do differently, or what change do you pledge to make? We're all about the long term here, so it doesn't have to be something that you're going to deliver by tomorrow. It may be something that's going to take a bit longer. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. You're all wonderful, and it's great to see so many familiar faces, but also to see lots of wonderful new faces as well.